tell you how thrilled I am to be presenting here as probably the only undergraduate student amongst such an amazing host of dignitaries present. As a law student, I've tried to focus on internal migration and how the fundamental rights of women migrating from their hometowns to other places within India are impacted because of various institutions such as gender stereotypes existing or lack of administrative opportunities for their recognition. So the NSSO has defined internal migration or internal migrants for that matter as people whose last place of usual residence any time in the past was different from the place of enumeration within national borders. So although they do change administrative boundaries, it remains within national borders, which especially for a country like India with a unitary system of governance becomes easier theoretically to govern these people. Now with recent literature, with the research I was doing, I found that it's only very recently that literature and migration started focusing on feminization of migration, with women being seen not only as accessories for migration or associational migrants with their men, but also as individuals who are migrating for their own purposes or individuals who are impacted because of migration, irrespective from the men whether they migrate or not. Now, the data of the previous few years of the census of India shows extremely interesting results. Dr. Didar Sinha was talking about how because of the LPG in 1991, there has been such a strong change in the economic policies that has enabled mobility a lot more. And the 2000 figures of the NSSO show that almost 85 million women migrated from 1991 to 2000 within India, and as compared to about 90 million men, which showed such a stark difference from the data of 1981 census, showing that how migration of women was not only linked to marital obligations or for marriage, but also because of various economic opportunities opening up for them as well. Now, feminization studies are also very extremely important because we realize that, as Ms. Mazumdar talks about, we still live in a very patriarchally dominated society. And I was working on protective discrimination some time back, and what I found out, at least within the Supreme Court's workings of protective discrimination for women, was that eventually it's still based on a very patriarchal stereotype of gender roles. So say for example in the Air India versus Nargesh Mirza case, the Supreme Court continued to talk about how women and their employment has to essentially be influenced by their eventual roles as mothers. And that is something that continues even in our society today. So what happens in that case is, when women are migrating in search of better opportunities, the opportunities that they are given are also dominated by those gender stereotypes and the same institutions that govern these stereotypes. Ms. Atinder has already spoken so much about the women being left behind as one of the subgroups of women being impacted by migration. She's spoken about how the autonomy of the woman gets impacted. So I wouldn't go much on that, but let me give you a personal example of how, with various researchers showing that the change in these gender roles also impacts the sense of masculinity and at times it also leads to a lot of marital conflicts. And let me give you a personal example for that. When I moved to Bangalore I'm from Delhi, when I moved to Bangalore for my studies, my father moved with me. And my mother he moved with me so that I don't have to stay alone. My mother stayed back because my younger sister is still studying in school. What happened initially, even during the first 1.5 years, was they started facing marital conflicts because my mother was the one earning. So despite coming from a very modern and liberal thinking, my father still felt threatened because of that questioning of masculinity for not being able to provide for the family. And I was just wondering how, despite being that educated and despite being that open about various changes, about trying to break through gender stereotypes, for me, he could still face the same thing. And not just because of himself, but because the society started questioning him. And I was just wondering how people who would not have that much opportunity to such an exposure, to such a cosmopolitan exposure, how would they fare in that situation? Now, with women being left behind, there are also an increasingly amount of data shows that women have started migrating with independent of men. So there are single daughters from rural areas moving out to cities in search of work, increasing, say, the autonomous migration of these women. There are also women, married women migrating out of the cities, and with that, another problem that comes up is the lack of caregivers in the family, because the mother, say for example, the mother is moving out, who takes care of the child in that case? Another thing that I was working on with this was when say the mother is moving out, there are some other women being left behind, and a lot of times the burden of that woman gets on the head of these women. Say the eldest daughter in the family has to start working for that. Now, the third one, of course, is the women migrating with men, whether because of marriage or because of family. And a lot of times, although we keep ma'am was talking about how moving to urban areas for employment, and a lot of times that whereas research shows that because these women are moving out of familiar surroundings, and because they have lack of access to basic necessities, because of further deeply entrenched stereotypes against them, it becomes difficult for them to survive. But a lot of studies also show that they have access to many amenities that might not be available in rural areas as well. Now, Mary Pawar in Gender Migration, and she focuses on why are women vulnerable. She comes up with certain problems that women face compared to men. So the first one, she says that the decisions of migration, like ma'am was pointing, is one, they don't have the decision to migrate, it's not theirs to take. Two, a lot of times it's misguided because of lack of information. Three, secondly, they only have very limited occupations that are open to them. So not only is employment limited, but the scope of employment as well is limited to them. And which questions whether they actually have the right to livelihood in the truest sense. Mr. Didar Singh was also talking about skill acquisition and the importance of skilled labor, but studies show that very rarely a career advancement or skill acquisition in rural areas and influence to migration. Further, the return and reintegration of these women migrants back to their homelands or their home villages or towns is a lot more problematic than men, because we're aware that women are more vulnerable to sexual exploitation, and that poses a very grave challenge to them being reintegrated because of a general stereotype attached to their exploited natures. When I introduced my topic, I was telling you about how it's only very recently that we started recognizing that women are migrating not only for marital reasons but also for economic reasons. However, data is not sufficient because of that either. But what's interesting to note is that when we're not recognizing women as migrants for economic reasons, we are considering them to be invisible as economic contributors, and therefore their economic contribution gets unrecognized completely. So, okay, then it's interesting to see how this invisibility permeates through so many cultural, social, economic, legal, political structures. And because of paucity of time, I'll focus on this extremely important thing, which I'm calling the struggle of access. Now, the Constitution of India is recognizing every person as a recipient of the fundamental rights. However, a majority of these rights are one linked to their place of residence, and two are linked to their identity struggle. For women migrating out of their places of residence, whether they are migrating out with a man or without a man, as in a family setting or alone, what the biggest problem that women face is that they have no access to their identity. So what happens in those situations is, say, because your place of residence is completely different from where you stay, you don't have access to PDS, you don't have access to your political right to vote, and all of these lack of accesses mean that one, you can't avail the service. Two, you can't fight against the non-availability of that service either. Right. What's also important here to understand is that because now these women are not only facing lack of access, they're also facing a lack of familiarity with the situation they're in. That could be because of language, that could be because of culture, that could be because of the place they're working in, because of the newness, and they are exploited not only by the new setting that they are put into, but also the distance from their families or distance from psychological understanding of home impacts them greatly. Now, because they cannot exercise their right to political franchise, it becomes very different for them to be change makers, in the sense that when you don't have the right to vote against something, whether or not it impacts you or not, you will have no say in that. So a lot of times policymakers and lawmakers tend to ignore this problem of internal migration of women completely. And it's interesting to see how almost 10% of the GDP of India per year is through circular migration by women, which means it's extremely important for policymakers and us lawmakers to focus on providing them not only access but registration and mobility services. Now, although the UNESCO has laid down various principles for better inclusion of these migrants, but let me conclude by saying that for starters, I think the most important thing that we can start with, given the gravity of the situation, is providing them access. Various NGOs have started doing that. Now, the Aadhaar card helped a lot, and various small NGOs started giving registration cards to members of trade unions, etc. And that helps them get better access, but obviously that's not enough. So we not only need better inclusion of these migrants in terms of the access to basic fundamental rights, we also need to develop the governance system for internal migration, which means that we really need institutions that not only monitor this internal migration, but also ensure that the rights that they can exercise and the services that are available to them as citizens of the country are adequate enough, at least for their survival.